Meeting at the crossroads where the two forbidden subjects of religion and politics intersect. This is the Sophie Scholl Roundtable. Sophie, a young woman in Nazi Germany, loved to talk about philosophy and theology, and she realized it's got to go into the public square. But in doing so, she realized the risk of making her views and her friends' views known in that society. And when the authorities found out, they were arrested and they lost their lives for the cause in which they had a passion for. So we just like talking about things pertaining to theology, non-theology, politics, how they may intersect, how they don't intersect. And Sophie Scholl loved hearing ideas from other perspectives. Though she may not have agreed, she still had an open mind to having those thoughts be expressed. So today, you see four of us here. Three, I'm sure, look familiar to you. One we're having here for the very first time, and his name is Sam Bailey. I met Sam when we were together in a group that met about spirituality.
That's right.
And you had diverse points of view in that group. And since COVID came, the group really hasn't met that often, except for outdoors during the summertime. And Sam has an interesting perspective on spirituality. Sam, would you mind just summing up what you think about it?
Well, spirituality for me is anything maybe that you're kind of in awe of that's greater than you. I am not religious, a believer, or anything like that, so I don't have that perspective.
So would you consider yourself agnostic or atheist?
Well, technically you might say both. Because agnosticism speaks to knowledge and theist or atheist speaks to belief. And I would say, I would contend that nobody knows. So in that regard, maybe everyone's some kind of an agnostic on that level. But since no one has provided sufficient evidence to me to justify a belief in a God, I don't accept the claim. But on the other hand, nobody can prove that something doesn't exist. So I'm an agnostic, an atheist agnostic, leaning more towards that side than a theist agnostic.
Object. You're stretching the meaning of agnostic to cover what I consider atheism, and then we'd have to find a new word to describe what I call atheism. That's a fault in thinking I encounter all the time. Atheism is believing is not assuming that it's not a belief; it's an absence of belief, and it's holding that position beyond a reasonable doubt.
Okay, yeah, and I see, maybe I didn't word it right, but I just don't accept the claim that there is a God because I haven't seen sufficient evidence for that. And I guess that would be my definition of atheism. Just purely that no one has provided me sufficient evidence, so I have to reject the claim until somebody does so.
And what got you interested in coming to a group that talked about spirituality?
Well, being an atheist, and honestly, since probably I was about 10 years old and developed independent thinking, and living in a rural area, you kind of feel isolated because there's a church on every corner, And you're brought up. I was raised Methodist, so it just seemed like a great opportunity to, I don't know, put myself out there. Because I remember in the very first meeting, there was, it's maybe 10 now, but it must have been 30 people at that first meeting. And we all went around and everybody, told about their perspective on spirituality. And I just happened to be the last one. And I said, well, I'm going to be a little opposite than most of you. And, I said I'm an atheist. And you get some, big eyes. And so, literally some people had never met anybody who was not a believer. And do you have just a second for
Sure.
a little side funny? So after the second meeting, there was an older lady that was walking out with me. And during the meeting, the sun was coming in the windows very brightly. And one guy went over and tried to close them, and then I got up and helped and got them all closed. So on the way out after the meeting, the woman said, well, I'm so glad to meet you. You even helped out people. Like I wouldn't. Just because, I wouldn't be good just because I don't believe.
Yeah, I see your point. Right. So
Anyway.
glad you could be introduced to Sam. And as I've said before, you've seen us three on the panel here talking. Norm to my right here, and to my immediate right, Garrett Kane, and I'm Mel McGinnis. And when we think about this topic of religion and politics, I feel like they do intersect. Meaning, what I believe about politics is grounded in what I believe about God. I believe in the creation story of man being made free. And in that freedom, that garden had a whole host of choices, except one. That is the tree of the knowledge of the good and evil. So in a sense, I believe the garden was conditionally safe. It was free, but conditionally safe, because in eating of that tree, it resulted in man's fall and the denigration of freedom, the denigration of man himself, man entering into that fall. So man fallen is in a position not to have a whole lot of power, because a lot of power in one man in a centralized location is not good, since man would abuse that power. So I think what we have, a system of constitutional government, is the best way to make sure power does not accumulate where it should not go, but be distributed. Garrett, how about yourself?
I'm a libertarian, and I was once a more of not necessarily a socialist, but I was a member of the Green Party for a while. And in my younger days, in college days, I was what you'd call probably a progressive. I believed that if just the right people could get control, then we could really change things for the better, for the good of society. And I don't know, I think it was, and this isn't going to make sense to these two, it was common grace of God making me realize that there was such a thing as total depravity, and that's what the fall created, was imperfect people all of a sudden transformed into people that were corrupted by sin. And it doesn't matter who you put in charge, eventually that corrupt nature is going to take over. And the best form of government that you can have is the least amount of people ruling over other people, which are all corrupted by a sinful nature that seeks power and seeks to do ill to their neighbors for the gain of themselves. So I don't know what came first, my my grace or my change in politics, but I think that I definitely was in that situation of not fully accepting Christ and accepting true saving faith while I was in that libertarian political mindset. And I think the Libertarian Party has acted as a stepping stone for people to good Reformed biblical Christianity in many cases and more recently. And I'm thankful for that, both in my life and in society in general.
Norm, you shared before, but share with us again
Well,
your
I'm in
thought on
very
government.
large agreement in many areas. I think I'm close to a prototypical or to a definitional conservative. Of course, I disagree in some places, but I think man does not have either the wisdom or the virtue or the incentives to create a good society and a good government. And when somehow or other we stumbled onto one that has delivered more prosperity, more freedom, more opportunity, more health, more security than any other in history, we better not tamper with it unless we have a darn good cause. And your conviction about your superiority, wisdom, and entitlement, Mr. Liberal, do not constitute one of those darn good reasons. Now, I can't see what God has to do with that.
All right. That's fine. And Sam, what would you say regarding government?
Geez, honestly, I haven't thought about this, so this is
Oh, okay.
kind of new, but I guess I don't have a religious take on the government at all.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I do agree that we stumbled onto a great system that has evolved over the years. The representative republic, in theory, is supposed to keep any one person from getting too much power. As we've seen, kind of Congress in a whole has become bought by various groups. So I'm not quite sure how to combat that other than, with term limits and turning things over a little more.
I think the libertarians have the answer to that. Have the government small enough so that it doesn't have all that power that can be bought or extorted.
Make
in
government,
the first place. It's
make
not
government
there.
matter less.
Yeah, it's not there to be corrupted. That power isn't.
And over the years, then, we've I don't know, the population in general has asked the government to do more things, to the point where, so we have this representative republic, and within it we make decisions on the democratic process and basis. But there is also, one wouldn't think it would have happened, but there's also socialism involved. We may be a representative republic, but we function very similar to in a democratic socialist prospect, in that taxes are accumulated and they're distributed for various projects to benefit all groups or one group or another. I'm not sure that was the original intention of the founding fathers, but
Well, I'm sure it was not.
yeah.
And it is not, you say the public has asked the government to do more and more. Well, maybe so, but not nearly so much as lobbyists, activists, pressure groups, organized movements of all kind. The power and the evil of organization are of tremendous importance in understanding society and history.
I'm getting very nervous with what I heard last night as Joe Biden talked a lot about more nationalizing things. I mean, I think healthcare is already nationalized enough.
More
In
than
fact,
enough.
yeah, I just feel like it needs to return back to the states because as I notice power accumulating in Washington, that's where you get all the more corruption. And the more things are nationalized, I think it invites itself
Not only
to greater
corruption,
corruption.
but incompetence, misdirection, misallocation.
And I think it's going to be very hard because I've heard it say once you institute something, it's very difficult to get rid of it.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Now, the one, healthcare to me is kind of a different topic. I kind of fall on the lines of, you know, we're kind of the worst out of all the industrialized countries in our healthcare system, as far as taking care of everyone. And I just think that, you know, good healthcare should not have any bearing on, you know, your socioeconomic status or anything. I think it should be a right. How to get all states to agree with that? So maybe, in my mind, that does fall on the federal level. I don't know. What do you think?
I would like to see it go right back to the states. Let them compete.
A right, he says, a right. A right of some people to place a demand on the wherewithal and the time of other people. That's not a right, that's a privilege. Do people have a right to food? Are farmers supposed to work for little or nothing so that everybody can eat? Do people have a right to shelter? Why do we pick medical care? Well, because there were some organized groups that managed to put that up for attention. Rights are things that keep other people from infringing on you, not that you can make demands on other people. Somebody has to mediate that, somebody with power. So there's an arbitrary element to that. Liberals have a great deal of trouble getting their mind around the fact that rich people can afford things poor people can't. And sometimes that even includes health care. Well, I call it medical care. I think health care is a pompous affectation.
Yeah, you're talking the difference of positive rights versus negative
Exactly.
rights, Norm. And yeah, positive rights by their nature require force from someone
And it's an oxymoron.
to make them happen. Negative rights, I mean, we can steer back into the theological realm as to what those are and where they come from. But I think we can. I mean, the three of us anyway agree that those are the ones that government institutions should be created for the purpose, if not sole purpose, of ensuring and defending. And that's life, liberty, pursuit of happiness.
Now, there isn't an answer to it. I don't think all problems have a solution. I expected you or someone to say, well, that's terrible. We can't have the poor people dying and suffering for want of money to afford medical care. Well, all right, that's bad, but is it worse than what's going to happen if we allow the government to have the power to control our medical care? I mean, if you weren't a Democrat, you didn't get a Chrysler dealership, and you're not going to get a heart transplant either. People laugh at me when I say that, but I hold to that. That's power is there has to be an allocation because the demand is infinite or near infinite, and the supply is not. And you cannot have a perfect system. You cannot not have a perfect allocation. That's apodictic. That's definitional. So something is going to be unfair. Well, is it going to be unfair because of somebody's economic status, or is it going to be unfair because of somebody's status in some relationship or respect to those in power?
Well, sure, you have to have some system that would be able to handle that. And
Like what?
I don't know. I mean, maybe when I used the term right earlier, it was the wrong term, but I think, and maybe interestingly, I think it's a moral issue that people don't have equal rights to medical care. And I don't know if it's my perspective or not, but it seems like some of the staunchest Christians don't seem to care about that. And my understanding of Christianity would be that, you help the less, the less advantaged than yourself.
Yeah.
You do. You don't give the government power to force me to.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
Right.
And I see where Sam's coming from. And you're right, and I don't know which order this came in, but I think the state that we're in now, or the situation we're in now, is that a lot of people assume that that's the government's role, whether it's right or wrong. But we were at a time early in our history and throughout world history where you did have a sense of moral obligation and a sense of private charity. And a lot of that was driven by churches and by religious organizations. I just think we've had a whole paradigm shift in our thinking about who and how we help the poor, to where now it's like, well, I pay my taxes and I'm busy working, so since I pay my taxes, the government's going to provide for those less fortunate, to where perhaps, and this is my theory of libertarianism, is that necessity is the mother of not only invention but innovation, and that if they're still poor and the government says we're not going to do it anymore and gives us a significant amount of our own income back versus stealing it from us and redistributing it, maybe that charitable nature will reignite.
But it cannot take care of everybody. Private charity can't.
Right.
Well, neither can the government. There's always allocation. So the question is, who decides how the money is going to be distributed? The people who earned it or the people who take it? What gives a government bureaucrat or a lawmaker moral superiority in deciding who gets medical care? Superiority over the people who have the means to provide. This is a philosophical question, and I'd like to know from people who advocate government or socialized medicine. I'd like to know the answer that they have to that question. Where does that moral superiority derive from?
The poor will always be with you. True or false?
I have a very close friend that if you gave him $1 million, in 10 years he'd be poverty stricken.
Oh yeah.
And he'd want to be.
Want to be.
Well, one would conclude that from his behavior.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And with that, we've gone a little bit longer than we usually do, but I thought the conversation's been very interesting, and join us next time as we pick up on the conversation here on the Sophie Scholl Roundtable.